Critical Thinking, and I'm Professor Borrowdale. And we're going to talk some more about argument by analogy today, and hopefully get beyond the abortion debate. But I think it's a really good example of the argument by analogy, because there's, like, as we talked last time, there's lots of different analogies that can be brought to bear in the issue. And the question is, what's analogous to what? What features are similar, which are different? And we'll talk some more about the violinist analogy. And I actually gave you an excerpt from an article by a philosopher named Judith Jarvis Thompson, who was the first person to propose this analogy that's you see in all the contemporary moral issues textbooks. Always have this example, and it's seen as sort of a ground-breaking argument, and it's based on this analogy we were talking about last time, which we'll talk about some more in a moment. I just want to review about what we're doing in here so far, and I like to think about this, some of this critical thinking stuff as sort of being like your basic forms in martial arts. So if you ever taken any martial arts, you do drills and you do like the same thing over and over again until it gets into muscle memory. So it's like, you do like the taekwondo, you take the stance and you go like this like a million times until you really get the form down. And so the idea, the same thing in critical thinking, you think, well, what the hell am I doing? I'm thinking critically. What does that mean? Right? So what does it mean? So you think about, well, what's the purpose of what I'm doing? And why does this happen? How do I get rid of it? Where's the back button? This damn thing. You hit the wrong, I could bonk something on the keyboard, waving my hands. Escape, there we go. Escape is your friend. And I remember, it's green. So I'm gonna turn it black right now. Okay, so I have to race after myself. This wired mouse needs a longer wire, I think. I actually don't use the keyboard. Okay. All right. Pen here. What's the goal of critical thinking? Just to review.
Find facts that correlate with reality.
There you go. So this is like be muscle memory. You should things should pop up like truth, knowledge, right? What is knowledge? Is knowledge of your personal subjective mental state? No, it's knowledge of reality. So knowledge of the truth means knowledge of reality. So you're looking for truth, and you want to get true beliefs, and here you want to get as many true beliefs as possible while avoiding the false ones. What's a false belief?
Something that doesn't correlate with reality.
Okay, what about wait a minute, isn't this kind of narrow-minded? Is like true and false? Aren't there a bunch of gray areas, especially in philosophy? What's the law of excluded middle say?
That a contradiction can't be true. That's never true or false.
So the first thing you said, no, the second thing you said was right. This is actually on the practice test, right? So a contradiction can't be true is, what is that? I mean, it's not, you might see it as an extrapolation from the law of identity. So the law of identity that says the thing is equal with itself or identical with itself. The law of non-contradiction says that a proposition is a contradiction can't both be true, right? So then there's a third thing, the law of excluded middle, which says that a proposition is either true or false. And if you're not sure, that's not a vagueness in truthiness or falsity, right? It's a vagueness in your knowledge. So your belief. So it might be you can't tell whether or not something's true or false, but it doesn't mean like out there in the world that things are like that the world is kind of this way and kind of that way, right? If you have a clearly defined proposition, right? So if I say it's raining and someone says, well, I wouldn't call that rain. It's just like a few drops coming down from the sky. Rain is when it's coming down, right? And somebody else would say, well, of course, if there's raindrops, there's rain. And so then you have to agree, okay, what do we mean by rain? And so once you have and language has this problem of vagueness, and this was why it's really important to define your terms. Otherwise, you'll end up as a postmodern philosopher, right? And then get a nice university post and spout nonsense for a living and write in journals that nobody reads, that's foisted on hapless young undergraduates to ruin their minds. But you don't want to do that, right? What you want to do is get like the real philosophy, which is like analytic philosophy. And analytic philosophy says, it goes back to Aristotle, law of excluded middle. If you have something that's well-defined and you don't have any vague terms, then either that statement is either going to match up with the world or it doesn't. Now, you might not be able to tell, but that's different, right? Yeah.
Wasn't it that, like, if the premise is true, the conclusion must be true?
Okay, so that's a different thing. That's an argument, yeah.
Okay.
So you use arguments to get to the truth, right? But and so in a valid argument, if the premise is true, the conclusion has to be true. But when you're just dealing with like a statement, you want to know, there's no argument because you just have a statement. Maybe it's a premise in an argument. Maybe somebody just asserts something, and they say something like, I think of some non-controversial example. The Book of Abraham in the Book of Mormon was a fraud based on the Egyptian Book of Breathings that Joseph Smith peddled around as a lost book of the Bible before people understood, before people could read hieroglyphics, right? So if I assert that, you think, well, that's a controversial claim, Borrowdale. It seems kind of, I don't know, like, aren't you worried about hurting somebody's feelings that might be of the Mormon faith or something like that because you're saying one of the books in their scriptures is a fraud, right? And you're like, I wonder if that's true. I never heard that before, right? So then you like go off and do some research. So either the Book of Abraham, or either Joseph Smith passed around this manuscript, which is part of an Egyptian funerary manuscript called the Book of Breathings, and said it was the lost Book of Abraham, or he didn't, right? There's no like, well, he did and he didn't. Now, people might have different beliefs. Like if you ask, Glenn Beck about whether that happened, he would say, well, no, that's like made up by enemies of the faith because he's a Mormon. Chances are that would be what he would say. And he would try to come up with some explanation. He would say, no, that didn't happen. And maybe you talk to like a scholar in religion, maybe even an Egyptologist, you ask him about that, and then he'd say like, yeah, here's the historical evidence, and here's what the book was, and here's Joseph Smith's translation, where he gets like a whole paragraph out of the word the. and one of those two accounts are true, right? So the details might be a little different, but either he passed around this Egyptian text as the lost Book of Abraham, or he didn't. And this has implications obviously for like the validity of the Mormon faith and their claims to have discovered books that were about the indigenous peoples of the Americas, and all sorts of other claims they might have, right? It goes to trustworthiness too. So either that claim is true or it's false. There's no sort of in between if we agree on what the claim is, because there's like, there's fraud and then it's not fraud, right? Now it could be that he found it and sincerely believed that it was the lost Book of Abraham. But if you have somebody like translating, I don't know what kind of story you would tell that he like came up with a translation of the Book of Breathings that came out as a lost Book of Abraham and he didn't know it. That might be a hard argument to make. I'm not sure it's a coherent story. Anyway, but for any proposition, right? There were, if I tell you there were WMDs in Iraq, but they were secreted out on a plane by Saddam Hussein and are hidden someplace in Syria in the Bekaa Valley, right? That's a claim. Either it's true or it's false. Might be really hard to tell, especially given like how hard it is to get into certain parts of Syria and poke around. And, the Syrian desert's a big place, right? So you have to do a lot of looking before you can conclude that it wasn't the case. There's testimony from one of Saddam's intelligence guys or military guys, and there's a book about it. And it's a theory about why they didn't find him there. But it could just be that Saddam's playing a shell game and try to convince people that he had them when he didn't. So, I mean, he had some, he just didn't have very many. So then either the weapons were secreted out to Syria on board a relief plane, or they weren't, right? So there's no sort of they were and they weren't at the same time. Yeah.
I was just relating to the quiz that was online. I was trying to really understand what's the definition of a premise? Is it like what the paragraph is meaning to explain?
Oh, so a premise is evidence put forth to support a conclusion.
Oh, okay.
So it's kind of weird. Like premises are defined by the fact that they're a statement made in support of a conclusion. A conclusion is something which is drawn from a list of premises, and it's like the point of a person's argument. So argument has two parts: the premises and conclusion. So what's a premise? Something that's put forth to support a conclusion. What's a conclusion? It's the end point of an argument that people use premises to support, right? So it's
okay. So it's basically like the topic of what they're trying to.
Yeah, it's not the so the subject matter is different. Like
it's like in the quiz to explain, it was like Bush didn't lie, and then it did its whole explanation.
Yeah.
Since it stated in the beginning, it was kind of like saying that this is the conclusion, this is why it's the conclusion, and then that's what you're supposed to answer.
Yeah, so, and a lot of these you have to, you can do, there's different ways. There's like, kind of like clues you can use, and this could have been something I could have done earlier in the class. So people that took the test early, did anybody take the test just today? Might be some people in TV land or something. So you have, that reminds me of an announcement too, that you have until next Tuesday to take the exam if you like. So I sent an announcement in Moodle, so make sure you like check those announcements or look in your email, make sure your email is hooked up to your Moodle account and so on. But so you have till Tuesday at 7 to take the first midterm exam. And people that took it early got some benefits from some bad questions I had to throw out, and you basically got the benefit of the doubt on those questions. So it's I'll I don't feel too bad about clarifying this thing that might help some people. It might not be of help to people who already took it. So a conclusion is it's the point of the argument. And I'm kind of what's the word? I'm talking about things that I've already talked about before, but I want to do a little more maybe clarity or detail about like how do you identify a conclusion. So a conclusion is the point of the argument. And then the premises are the support for the conclusion. They're what proves the conclusion. And the conclusion is the thing that's supported by premises. So, I mean, you could say, if you like, what's a conclusion? That which is supported by the premises. What are premises? That which proves the conclusion, right? So this reciprocal relationship between the two, or it's they're mutually defined. So, and then premises and conclusion together are an argument. So an argument has to have at least one premise, at least one conclusion, and the premise has to logically support the conclusion. So if somebody just makes a claim, that's not an argument. If somebody makes a, just an unsupported statement, that's not an argument. Now the one you said, you correctly identified, this is going to help some people here.
It took me about 4 times.
And then, since this is on the practice test, it's fine to talk about it. Now this question will be on the exam, so. So on this practice question, that you correctly identified the conclusion is Bush lied. Bush didn't lie, right? And this is what you'd say like a implied conclusion. I'm trying to remember if the example, if I actually, do I actually have the statement Bush didn't lie, or is it kind of implied by the
It
paragraph?
was something close to that right in
Yeah.
the beginning, like Bush didn't lie.
Yeah, maybe it just
because-
started out saying Bush didn't lie.
Yeah, because blah, 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 blah.
And then it's
I think
because
it was
people
pretty
think-
explicitly
Yeah.
stated.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the same, again, I'm not saying Bush didn't lie, but if you, this is just an example, right? So the example is, well, Bush didn't lie, and then it has, a bunch of evidence, right? So this is the conclusion, and often the conclusion is, sometimes it's stated first, sometimes it's last. And so as you're looking at an argument, often when you see an argument, they'll tell you the conclusion first, and then give you all the reasons for it. Sometimes they'll give you all the reasons, and the conclusion will be last. Now, this isn't foolproof, because fools are so ingenious. But so there might be in the middle, but at least it's, when you're trying to figure out, you have no other place to start. You're thinking, well, what about the first thing they said and the last thing they said? Is those are good candidates. And then for the conclusion, you see, so therefore, I conclude that, right? And so you see these, there's words, thus, right? Those are all like conclusion words, right? And then for the premises, like, I don't know, the Senate Intelligence, Bipartisan Intelligence Report says blah, blah, or something like that. The Senate report says whatever. Saddam was trying to bluff. This is backfired. Often when people come up with these kooky schemes to try to do something, they end up blowing up in their face, and here's a good example. So the Senate report says blah, blah. So here, if you see the words like because, that's a good one. What's another like thing if you're like giving support? Let's say, and this is because, so you're giving a premise in support of some argument.
That's why.
That's why. Actually, let's see, and that's why. I'm trying to think of the that's why, is that's really. It seems like that might actually indicate a conclusion. Because you could say, the simplest forms of life are the earliest in the fossil record, and that's why the theory of evolution is a good theory, right? So that would introduce a conclusion.
Due to?
Yeah, something due to, that's good. Due to. Oh, the word for.
Yeah.
Right, so using it's kind of like a formal antique thing, I think that in the Socrates, I have a Socrates quote, I think he uses the word for. So there are little words you think about, like, okay, and you ask yourself when you read any statement, all right, is this what the person's trying to get me to believe? And how does this relate to all the other statements they make? So, like, if I had like all the statements on like an index card, which one of them would I look at and say, this is what they're trying to convince me of? And if I look at all the other cards, could I like stack them up and say, okay, reason 1, reason 2, reason 3, right? Because that's how the argument goes. Here's the reasons for the conclusion, and then here's the conclusion. And the reasons should support the conclusion if it's a good argument. So you always want to ask yourself when you're having a discussion with something, well, what are they trying to prove? What's their point? And sometimes it's not all that clear if they're being sarcastic, for example. Or sometimes people just aren't clear. So you want to think, what's the point? Hopefully they have a point. Like Larry King used to always have callers, he'd say, is there a point, Kala? Right? So you want to ask yourself, okay, is there a point? And then if so, what is it? And then what reasons are they giving me for accepting this conclusion? If the reasons aren't good enough, then you reject the conclusion. Okay, so and we're talking about something else before that. It's a good question though. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Probably more than you want to hear.
A lot better about it.
Okay, cool. All right. Oh, so you want to get, here's a question. So what's more important? Having as many true beliefs as possible or avoiding the false ones?
As many true beliefs as possible.
All right. Anybody else? Yeah.
Avoiding the false ones.
Yeah.
All right. So why would you say why is it more important to avoid false beliefs than true ones than to get a lot of true ones? Or the other way?
It's not a matter of how much you know. It's a matter of how well you think and being able to avoid the bad trails that'll get you killed.
But I'm missing out on all this knowledge. I could believe all these great things. I try to believe
And the
5
more
contradictory
true
things
beliefs you
before
have,
breakfast.
The more you can falsify other beliefs with like problems with that.
That sounds so negative. Why wouldn't I go and falsifying other people's beliefs? That seems kind of rude too.
It's like
Yeah.
teach a man to fish. Don't give him all the fish in the world. Don't give him all the truths. Teach him to learn the truth by knowing how to avoid the false.
I guess.
Yeah, but then you're like getting truths. So like you just get a bunch of truths, and even though there's some false ones mixed in with that, you got more truths than the next guy, so you're like ahead. As long as you have like more true beliefs. How about this? If as long as I have more true beliefs than false beliefs, I'm doing good. Like I have 1,000 true beliefs, and maybe I only have like 400 false beliefs.
So it depends on.
I know a lot about the world, right?
I mean, would the excessive amount of true beliefs help you avoid the false ones? Or do you think it'd be overly biased?
I suppose if you get more true beliefs, they might help you avoid ones and the false ones in the future. But whatever you're doing to get all those true beliefs, it's going to let in a bunch of false ones too. Think about this like pain and pleasure. So is your life going well if you have like your experiences are like 60% pleasurable and 40% painful? Okay, 50-50. Are you doing all right? Well, we say if a person like half of their life is happiness and half of it is misery.
I probably would say that's not a good life.
It's a neutral life almost.
You're like 1% away from suicide, right? Where like your suffering outweighs your happiness, and you're like, well, this isn't a life worth living because I'm down below 50%, right? So think about like false beliefs are like that. I mean, they're like pain, they're bad, and you want to avoid them like the plague. And even if it means giving up the chance of believing something true, you should give up that chance that something might be true in order to believe false things. Like I had somebody sent me like what do you call it? Like a chain letter on the internet. I think they even sent it to me on Facebook. It's like, God's lucky angel or something like that, and send this to 5 friends, and God will bless you with, I don't know, he'll put glitter in your hair or something. I don't know what it was like. You're supposed to get health, wealth, and prosperity, and all these good things are supposed to come to you if you send this picture of the lucky angel to all your friends. You had to do at least 5, and sometimes it's like connected with any. If you don't, God will curse you, and all these bad things will happen to you. The really good chain letters use the carrot and the stick. So somebody like, or just maybe that's maybe, even though that's silly. How about another one? The Bill Gates thing. Everybody get the Bill Gates thing? Bill Gates is doing some new thing with Microsoft, and if you send this to all your friends, you'll get like $10,000 or whatever. I don't know what the number was. Basically, if you spam all your friends with this ridiculous email, you're going to get money showing up at your house. And I had a friend send this to me, and they added the comment, "I hope it's true." And so I used to be really nice about this. Now I think shame is like a lost art in this society. People have no shame and no respect for others. So I shamed her into thinking, how could you send this to me, and just think about it. This is just,
How dare you?
I hope it's true. Just that statement, I hope it's true. I hope it's true. It's just, didn't bother to think about it. Didn't bother to think about, like, is this thing that's likely to be true? But her idea is like, oh, I might get a bunch of money, cash money showing up at my house, and all I have to do is like bother 5 friends with this chain email. I guess I'll do it. So there, if you're credulous, so this is this whole thing about being skeptical. Why do you want to be skeptical? Because avoiding the false beliefs is super important. And you got at this a little bit. Even if you miss out on that money Bill Gates is going to send you. The thing is, if you're skeptical, the chances, if you're actually skeptical, then you're going to like check it out, and then you realize rationally that the chances of that being true are like minuscule. They're like 0 or maybe a little bit over 0, but 0.00001% chance. You'd be better off playing the scratchers of the lottery or something. So avoiding false beliefs, much more important. Now there might be some cases where everything in life is a trade-off, right? You pays your money and takes your choice, and you have opportunities, and you don't get anything without it, some kind of risk, right? But you got to be smart about your risk, and you don't want to like base it on some like ridiculous scheme and be taken in and lose your money, lose your health on some quack health cure when you have a serious disease. So there's all sorts of really bad things you have. You pointed this out, which I think is a good argument for it, that the false beliefs can lead you to disaster, whether it was not having a true belief. Try to think about, Bitcoin. If you're a Bitcoin skeptic, you're probably like, oh, yeah, and it's still going to go up. Bitcoin is on the rise, and it can only go up. Or you're a skeptic about the economy or something like that, and you're betting that the Dow is going to go down. You're probably feeling pretty dumb. So if you might miss out on an opportunity, but the thing is, you could also lose your shirt. So what's more important, like not making the most of an opportunity or losing your shirt, and metaphorically too, not just with money. So the idea of skepticism is important because you really want to avoid those false beliefs, even if it means giving up some true ones. So the skeptic, if you look at their collection of beliefs, their collection is really small, but it's like gold, right? It's that their beliefs are really valuable because they're well justified and they have lots of good reasons for them. Okay. And then we talked about, I don't know if I want to revisit this empathy thing or not. Maybe we'll come to it in a minute. Thinking, objectivity, versus bias, and we talked about the skepticism just a minute. So the thinking, why is thinking important? Well, we talked about this a bit last time, and I really want you to think about this as we're going through our debates in class here. The thinking versus feeling. So you have these two parts of your brain. There's the cerebral cortex that covers conscious thought, what we think about as thinking, problem solving. And then there's your medulla oblongata, that's sometimes called the reptile brain, and it controls your fight, flight, or freeze response. And if you're in an emergency situation, you really want to move out of that reptile brain into the cerebral cortex. And you look at trained professionals like EMTs, firemen, policemen. They're able to do that because they've learned to control that visceral response. It's right? There's run away, or fight, right? You have these two things that just kick in where you get this adrenaline rush, and then you're freaking out, and either you're running away, or you're charging, or you're oh my God, what do I do? And if you've ever been in a crisis situation and you're there's a fire or something like that, and you have a friend or a family member who's just sort of running around and freaking out and not being helpful, and you're we need to solve this problem right now. It's really important. If you're not thinking clearly, they always tell you the number one thing when there's an emergency. Remember, what do they tell you? If there's active shooter thing or whatever, what do they say? Don't panic. That's number one advice. It says stay calm. Like they had the earthquake drill today, right? And the number one thing you want to do is stay calm and think. What am I supposed to do? Oh, it's like find a place. Like if there was an earthquake, I'd be like, oh, there's an earthquake. Oh my God, right? That's like that's a reptile thing. I know what I'll do. I'll like run for the exit like everybody else, right? And then that thing hanging from the ceiling is gonna fall down my head and end up with a traumatic brain injury and never teach philosophy again. So what would I do? I'm like, oh crap, there's an earthquake. What should I do? Oh, we did that earthquake drill. I'm supposed to duck and cover and get under something that to protect myself. I'm like, oh, I got a little cubby hole underneath this desk here. I'll get down and crawl underneath there and hunker down and cover my head with my hands. Like, if I won't do that unless I'm thinking and if I'm calm and rational. And I might like yell out to you, get under the tables until it stops, right? And if I run to the door with the people aren't thinking clearly, they'll probably get trampled and then crushed by the debris coming down. So that's like thinking. So if you're in a crisis situation, you got to remain calm. Well, when you're having an argument, you want to do the same thing. You want to remain calm. Don't panic. Don't get angry. Don't get defensive. You want to move into that calm part of your brain where you're like, okay, I'm trying to solve a problem. I'm being rational and being practical. And I'm not going to let my emotions grab me by the throat and drag me around the room. And so the same thing about objectivity, right? So it's really easy when someone's talking about something that kind of gets under your skin or upsets you. It's really easy to get personal about things and to take things personally. Whether somebody's like attacking your favorite politician, or do you feel like they're attacking your religion, or maybe there's some issue that revolves around your gender, your ethnicity, or some of these really things that are really people take very personally. If you're talking about an objective political issue or about some social sciencey issue, you want to stay objective and think, oh, I'm just going to look at this problem. I'm not going to take it personally if the person says something, unless they say something like, I don't know, you're a Nazi, or, you suck, or something like that. Then you might take it personally. I actually usually things like this will happen when you get into a political discussion. Things will devolve quickly, and I'll say something like, well, that's not helpful, and that's called an ad hominem in logic, and it's actually not, it doesn't prove your case, it just makes you look bad. And let's take a step back and try to look at things objectively here. So you want to try to be objective, and then be aware of your own biases, and then try to correct for them. To think, okay, well, I have these beliefs, and I have this certain station in life, so maybe I'm showing a little favoritism towards my own beliefs or my own way of looking at things. Let me try to see it from their perspective. This is where I think that kind of something like empathy is really important. Although I'd say you don't necessarily want to feel what they feel, but you want to think what they think and see things from their point of view. And I think, again, when it comes to ethics, maybe some feeling how someone would feel in a certain situation might help you out somewhat, but you still have to run those through kind of rational analysis about, okay, so they might be really upset about that, about a certain situation, but what does that mean? And that comes back to rational thought. So it's put aside your prejudices, your preferences, your egos, what you wish is true, what you'd hope is true, what fits in with the other beliefs, and then try to be objective about it, look at through the lens of calm, cool rationality. I guess it can't be cold and cool. Calm, cool rationality. And then so those are the things. So when you're thinking critically, try to be fair and objective. Don't focus on like winning the argument, but really think, okay, let's have a discussion here. You can present a case and you can say, well, this is what I believe, and the other person can say what they believe, and you try not to think, get triggered or take it personally, but just try to talk about it, because you're both interested, hopefully both interested in the truth. That should be like the object, and so you don't want to beat down the other person or try to convert them, because if you're wrong, don't you want to know that? I want to know that, and some of my best learning experiences have been on like the losing side of an argument where someone pointed out something. I'm like, I'm not really sure what to say about that. And maybe at the time I'm like, well, here's my comeback. And, I'd say, well, that seems like a really fatal criticism in my view, but here's what I think about it. And the person might have gone away and then thought, well, Borrowdale was just totally entrenched in his view. I don't think I convinced him. But then I was like, I don't know, maybe I need to rethink this, and I end up changing my mind. So you never know about that too. And so when you're thinking about objectivity, you also want to be thinking about confirmation bias. So confirmation bias is when you only look for cases that confirm a belief you have, and you ignore cases which would disconfirm it or disprove it. So, and this is what was going on partly in this logic example, which we talked about way too long, I think, the other time. And we had a astute person in the room that brought to my attention, actually, the fact that I kind of looked at this argument and I hadn't really thought through like this rule that you need, which is part of the example, which I just sort of glossed over and skipped. And what's your name again?
Josh.
Josh. So Josh brought out this point that the example assumes that there's this rule that every card has a letter on one side and a number on the other side. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? So you have these 4 cards. And this also shows, like, if you make a mistake, you just you say, hey, I made this big mistake, and you tell everybody, and it shows you're human, and it shows that you're humble and not biased and not trying to always worry about coming out on top and winning and making everybody think that you're super smart. So anyway, you have these 4 cards, and there's this rule that for every card there's a number on one side and a letter on the other side, and then the question is so if you have this rule, if there's a D on one side, there's a 3 on the other, what would be the least number of cards you turn over to try to tell whether that's the case? And most people, they'd say, well, you turn over the D card, or they'll say the D card and 3 card. Now, why do they pick those if the rule is if D then 3? Well, it's that confirmation bias, right? They're like, let's see if this rule is true. Let's try to prove the rule is true, right? So if I turn over the D and there's a 3, I'm like, I'm right, right? Or if I turn over the 3 and there's a D, I go, I'm right. But you don't think, well, gee, I wonder if this rule is wrong. If I turned over the F card and there was a 3 there, I would prove the theory is wrong. Or if I took over the 7 card and I turned it over and there was sorry, I got this wrong now. So if I turn over, so it's D and 7. So if I turn over this D card and there's a 7 there or something like that, I know that would be wrong. So I do need the D card, but I also need the 7 card. But you're not thinking, well, if this theory is wrong, if I turn over that 7 card and there's D there, that will prove my rules, blow it out of the water. You're looking for the D or the 3, and you're trying to confirm the theory. You're not trying to disconfirm it. And so so 2 things that this theory shows. One thing this little exercise is meant to show is that your intuitions about symbolic logic and abstract thought aren't always reliable, and that when you're dealing with super abstract symbols and ideas, that logic is really hard sometimes. This is why if you take a symbolic logic class at U of O, I wish you the best. Having been I actually did a review. My name's in one of the top logic books that they use, and I used to teach a logic course regularly, and I didn't really enjoy it because it's kind of like doing a math class. But it's hard. The only time I ever had a student cry was trying to figure out, taking a logic class. And they actually said, I tried so hard, right? It's like one of those things that can be really tough. But symbolic logic, you have these philosophers and this idea you can take all these philosophical problems and turn them into symbols and then write out an equation and come up with all the truths of philosophy, which is ridiculous. So I think symbolic logic is of a questionable use for practical everyday reasoning. So that's one. But the other point I want to make is about confirmation bias. So symbolic logic of limited practical use. And then also there's the confirmation bias. So these are the two.
I think there's another word, is that ridiculous ad absurdum, proof by contradiction.
Yes, you can do that, and that's kind of like an argument form. We'll talk about like how that goes, and some of these basic things, like I think like understanding modus ponens and modus tollens, and why like denying the antecedent is a fallacy, or why asserting the consequent is a fallacy. And sometimes you'll see these fallacies pop up in arguments, and so it's useful to see, like, you can kind of write out the argument and say, oh, that's denying the antecedent. That's a bad argument. Like that thing, I gave the example of like the guy, what was the one? Like people often do this, like the fallacies of overgeneralization. So if you have, so I said like almost all terrorists are Muslims, and then if I say the guy that owns a cafe on 13th is a Muslim, therefore he's a terrorist, right? So, and people make this argument, right? They're just not thinking clearly. So because all or most the terrorists are Muslims doesn't mean most Muslims are terrorists, right? So they're switching things on the side of the implication of the P and the Q. So that's a case of categorical syllogism, but it's similar, right? So you need to understand that difference, that because all or most of members of one group are part of another group doesn't mean that if you're a member of that group you're going to have that quality. So to understand like how the modus ponens and modus tollens and some of these formal fallacies work can be helpful. I'm taking a political science class and we're talking about the revolutions in the Middle East, in Iran, but mostly focusing on Egypt and the kind of fizzled Muslim Brotherhood revolution there. It's kind of interesting looking at the intersection between religion and politics. But when you're looking at something like that and people make a logical mistake like that, sometimes you can say, aha, denying the antecedent, or aha, asserting the consequent. But then beyond that, you using these little U's and backward E's, they have the propositional calculus, and trying to turn everything into an equation and think you can come up with the answer to every problem, I think there's this group of philosophers called the logical positivists, and that was their idea. And they're kind of like analytic philosophy on steroids, and they think that, you can turn everything into an equation and sort of crunch it and come up with the answer, which I think is kind of it's absurd, and so this is why I don't do a lot with Venn diagrams and stuff. Anyway, so let's talk about so confirmation bias. Can you think of another case of confirmation bias, like a concrete case? So it's a form of prejudice, right? It's where you have a belief and you're prejudicing that belief, and when you see new evidence that comes out, or when you're just looking out the sphere of things, evidence. If you see evidence for your belief, you're like, see, it's true. If you see evidence against your belief, what do? You ignore it, or what else might you do? Deny it, right? You might make an argument against it. And so you want to be aware of that. Everyone in this room has that tendency to privilege your own beliefs against those of others. Here's an example. So this is kind of there's some overlap between the confirmation bias and false cause. So like my mom has this belief that she has a psychic connection with my dad. And when they're both retired now, but when they're working, my mom would say, well, whenever I think about your father, like he calls right away. And it's because we have this psychic connection that every time I think about him, he calls. My mom has this pre-existing beliefs in psychic powers. She was New Age before the New Age was coined. And she's got books about, past lives and, Edgar Cayce prophecies and all kinds of stuff like that. And she's Shirley MacLaine, and she's been into it for a long time. And so she's really into she's gone to astrologers people that do psychic readings and stuff. So she has this pre-existing belief in psychic phenomena, and she has this phenomena. She's thinking about my dad, and ring, ring, ring. There he is on the telephone. And then concludes that she has psychic powers, or that she has a psychic connection with my father. So how might this be confirmation bias? Yeah.
The telephone ringing confirmed her psychic powers to her.
Yeah, every time the phone rings, this is my father, right? Or when she thinks about my father, the phone rings and he calls. Yeah.
She probably discludes all the times that she thought about who, like your father, and didn't call.
Yeah, so she's thinking about him and he doesn't call, right? Or she's thinking about him, the phone rings and it's a telemarketer, right? And she might even have had the thought, oh, that's Kent calling, and she picks up the phone and there's a telemarketer. And then after she hangs up the phone, what did she say? Maybe I don't have psychic powers? She thinks, oh, the damn telemarketer. She's just not even thinking that it's a disconfirming instance. Yeah.
Could she also like get a call and then in her own mind tell herself she was thinking about him when she really wasn't?
Yeah, that's a good. Maybe she was thinking about him like half an hour ago, and when the phone rings, she says, "Oh, I was just thinking about you," right? So that sometimes that happens. People will like reinterpret past memories or maybe it was 10 minutes ago, but she thinks it was a minute ago because it's kind of like, again, this bias towards it. She'll kind of compress the time to make it fit. And people will do this. They'll reinterpret past memories to make them fit with their existing belief system. What might be another explanation? Well, what about like the times he might call?
She could definitely be used to the pattern of when it goes.
It might be, yeah, mid-morning break, lunch hour, before he's coming home. Typically, he'd call before he'd come home from work and see what the dinner plans were, right? So it's so there all these facts that she's ignoring, which are probably a better explanation than psychic powers about this connection. And it may be that the question is who else calls, right? And how often did they call, and how often my father called? It could be there's probability as the phone's ringing, chances are it's dad because not all of the people call, right? So there's all this evidence that my mom doesn't have psychic powers, but she totally ignores that and holds on to her belief. And then a few instances where she thinks about him and he calls, that she says, oh, this proves my belief is true. So you want to avoid that. Now, are there cases where you might be, well, let me give you a couple examples of bad confirmation bias. So Dan Rather is a CBS News commentator. He's been around forever. He's on 60 Minutes. Super famous guy. Very like distinguished broadcaster, numerous awards. He's like a top-notch journalist. And so he got this, he had this source who had supposedly had the National Guard's records for former President Bush that said he skipped out his National Guard service and he didn't show up when he's supposed to, and just like it was a really bad Guard member, and did all these things he wasn't supposed to, right? He has this like folder of like information and official documents, and he got that, and the source was kind of like a sketchy guy, and he didn't have document experts examine them. He just ran with the story. He's like a hard-nosed news guy. He's like a news analyst. He's like the top of the game. Right? He used to be the news broadcaster for NBC News, the 6 o'clock news. Is like the top guy at the network. And he gets this like a crazy, some fringy guy with a folder of stuff that he claims is right before the election, of course, right, in October. So as he claims is going to put George W. Bush out of the election, and why does he go with it? Now it could be that he has a desire to defeat Bush, right? He wanted the other guy to win. I can't remember when this was. Was this Gore? I think it was Gore v. Bush in 2000. That might have been Kerry. I don't remember. I think it was Gore though. It was 2000. So, well, what else?
I just wanted a good story.
He wanted a good story. This is like a big thing, right? So his desires for a good story. So let's see, Dan Rather and Bush Guard records. So let me put this, so desire, so good story. So he's going to go, so he's going to have accolades, defeat Bush, who he hated. So he,
Confirm that you're gonna see his false source.
I don't know if he is really invested in like the source being like
Good or bad?
good. He just, what the end result was, he wanted, he's a news guy, so if he has like if Dan Rather is the guy who bluely lit off the biggest story, you know, of 2000, and it led to the defeat of Bush, who was, you know, inching ahead in the polls, then that would be, he'd like be a big deal, right? And so, so he has his journalistic desires, his desire to politically to defeat someone that he disagrees with ideologically. So this is ideology, which is a big thing. It's a big confirmation bias. Ideology is huge. So basically, he wanted it to be true. Anybody know, like, this is probably some people in this room weren't even born, but anybody, maybe not, maybe that's 2000, so it's not quite that way. But you would have been like maybe 3 or 4 years old, some people. So what do you think, what do you think the result was when it turned out that these were fraudulent?
Well, he probably got demoted a little bit.
And he got the boot. He's like, you know, he's an older guy now, so but he's come back in some limited capacity, but he was at the top of the heap, and you know the mighty fell, and he got bounced from CBS News because he didn't check out the story. Why? Because he was really excited and wanted to get a really good story, and because he hated George W. Bush so much that he really wanted it to be true and didn't look at the evidence. So you know, W.K. Clifford would say, "Shame, shame, Mr. Rather. You know, it's always wrong for anyone, at any time, anywhere, to believe anything on insufficient evidence." And it looks like this Trump dossier thing is the same thing. That Clapper and Brennan, these guys who are like in the CIA, they're in the intelligence gathering business, or they're defense intelligence, the director of national intelligence, Clapper and Brennan, and this guy Comey, head of the FBI. And they get this dossier about like Trump paying prostitutes to pee on a hotel bed in Russia. Then there's supposedly video of this, and they're like, "All right, we're gonna get him," and they use that to like, they're like, "Let's have an investigation." And I give them credit for like not just being, you know, cynical and saying this is an excuse to go on a fishing expedition. I think they really believed it, and you know, and now there's a huge investigation and fallout from it, and they're looking pretty stupid right now. So we'll see what happens with this dossier is just a name for a file folder of stuff. And it's another case where something comes through and it's like, wow, it's, yeah, you look at it right now after the fact, you're like, really, they believe that without any corroborated evidence? You know, some guy, I guess he'd done some contracting for MI5, or I don't remember what the story was, but it was really sketchy source, sketchy material, but they used it as a basis for an investigation because they believed it because they wanted it to be true. And you can think of like some, let me get one more. Well, Obama's a Muslim. See stuff like that going around. So I have friends like this, and I just kind of roll my eyes, and it's like, well, what if he is, right? But I don't think he is. He says, I think he's probably like some kind of like super liberal Christian. Did you have your hand up, or? Oh, sorry. So the people show like there's a picture of him in like Islamic garb. Well, he has relatives in Kenya. He's going back to visit. I think Indonesia. I think he went back to. He grew up in Indonesia, so he goes back there to visit, and he's wearing the traditional garb in some ceremony or picture. Doesn't mean he's a Muslim. he might have been a Muslim when he was like 5 or something, maybe 8. I forget when he left Indonesia, but and people look, here's his grade school records. And there's his name, Barry Satoro, and it says Muslim. See, right? And it's like, well, he's 8 years old. His father's a Muslim, and so like in Indonesia, it's sort of like if your family's Muslim, you're de facto Muslim. You send them to Muslim school. It's just like it's like if I were to say like example like anybody here raised Catholic, go to Catholic school? Yeah, so like if I were to say, you're not like it's an indictment or anything like that. Tell me your name again. Blake. So it's Blake here, our class Catholic. He might be able to enlighten us on this. So are you still Catholic now? No. Okay, so like if I were to say, well, like you just don't want to take the flack for all the criticism I have of the church. You're a stealth Catholic, and you're. So if I was like trying to say that you were Catholic but trying to hide it, I'd say, look, and you went to St. Mary's whatever school. What was it? What school did you go to?
I went to public school.
Oh, you went to public school. So you didn't get sent to a Catholic school?
No, but I did like Sunday school.
Okay, yeah. What if I found like some old Sunday school records and said, see, there's Blake's name right there on the Sunday school roster, and so, but that's ridiculous, right? So that's not. And then
was he born in Kenya?
Yeah. That's another thing. The question about I don't know. I'll steer clear of the whole can of worms. I think that. So I'd say that definitely the evidence of Obama's Muslim is like really low, and there's lots of reasons against it. The Kenya thing, you got his grandmother saying that he was born there and she was there at his birth. So I don't know what you make of that. But let's stick to the Muslim thing, because this is disconfirmable, right? So there's video of Obama talking about people criticize me for my Muslim faith, and you can watch this, and he says that. So what do you think about that? John McCain's talking about my Muslim faith, something like that. Well, it turns out he's talking about his supposed Muslim faith, right? So people are making a big deal about my supposed Muslim faith, but he just says my Muslim faith, right? But the confirmation bias, people are like, oh, see, he admitted it on TV, and ignoring all the other things he said, and the fact that he went to like Reverend Wright's church, who's like a Christian black liberation theology guy, right? So it's sort of like social justice, kind of like Latin American. You got the social justice liberation theology thing in Latin America. They have one for African Americans here, and so he went to Reverend Wright's church for 20 years. It's a liberal Christian church, and so that's all the evidence is that he's got 2 autobiographies, right, that talks about stuff. So this is a ridiculous view, but people that think he's a Muslim will see a picture of him in Islamic garb, or they'll hear an interview where he talks about his Muslim faith, and they're like, see, right, and ignore all the other evidence that he's not a Muslim. So you want to avoid that. Can you think of other? So that's confirmation bias. So avoid that. Let's talk about the ad hominem argument. So this, maybe I'll put this. I'll put good. Let's see. So you say CC when a parent confirming evidence, and again, you ignore the disconfirming evidence. Which is odd, because you think, like, if you're trying to make political points, maybe point out his, the Reverend Wright stuff seems like that's the way you should go. But to try to say that he's both a Muslim and a Marxist at the same time is, pick one, right? Because those two things don't always go together. So if you're Christian Marxist or Muslim with terrorist sympathies, sort of pick one of those things if you're gonna try to smear the guy. At least be consistent. Not that I recommend the politics of personal destruction, but this whole idea don't catch yourself saying see. It's kind of like you want to say I told you so with your beliefs. Oh, we're way over our break time. Feel free to raise a question if I get too excited and I go past our break time. So let's take 10 minutes.
What time does it usually start? Like 1:50?
Okay, we're back. So let's, I mentioned earlier that it's permissible to privilege your beliefs for a couple of reasons. I think just really two. So you want to avoid confirmation bias, which is dismissing out of hand any belief which doesn't fit with your presuppositions, right? So that's bad. But then the question is, do you have to treat your beliefs as just like anybody else's beliefs and assume that they might be true and they might not be true? What do you think? Like, so do you have to always assume, like, you get into any discussion on any topic whatsoever, that you have to assume that there's a 50% chance that the person you're talking to is right and that you're wrong? Just to be fair. I would say no, like, and particularly like, so if you, so you have a right, this is talking morality, I guess, responsibility, to privilege, to use a dirty word, privilege, I don't know how to spell this damn word.
The first is an A.
The first, this should be an A?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think it might be an I.
Yeah.
Privilege? Privilege? I think it's an I. I'll have to look it up later. Anyway, you have a right to privilege your beliefs if,
It's an I.
yeah, so supported, by careful research, evidence, over time, and, scrutinized, really scrutinized, not just like looking for confirming evidence, right? Scrutinized, So this is kind of like the reason why there's, and this has to do with skepticism and conservatism, and say in science, right? So science is naturally conservative, and the idea is you have all these experiments done over a long period of time, and then all these generalizations about all those experiments, and you come up with a paradigm. And whenever you get some outlying case that comes up that looks like it doesn't fit in with these theories that are based on this mountain of evidence, you're like, I don't know, that doesn't fit with anything else we know. I'm skeptical, right? So then you try to replicate it. And then after a while, you might come up with a new theory that fits the new evidence better. And maybe you start looking at the new evidence and say, well, maybe there is something that we keep on doing this experiment. And it keeps on coming out this way. And these results don't fit in with what we're doing now. And so then you say, well, I guess we have to junk our theory or revise it in the light of this new evidence. So like, for example, you think about like cold fusion. So cold fusion turns out as a crappy theory. It was one experiment that was not replicated. And, but the people that love, they're like the contrarians, and the people that like, fringy science theories. There's even like this guy Wayne Green. He's still around. He's getting kind of old. He had like a cold fusion magazine that he did all about cold fusion, like something that doesn't happen. So so you compare that with like relativity or something like that. So, so cold fusion was a one-off, and it turned out everybody else lots of people tried to replicate it, and it didn't work. And then they figured out it was experimental error. That you cannot do fusion at room temperatures. You need temperatures like on the sun, like billions of degrees, in order for fusion to work. It would be really nice if we could do fusion at room temperature, but we can't. At least the evidence is that we can't do that. But you look at relativity, where you move from Newtonian physics to Einstein. How did that happen? Well, there are certain things that confirmed Einstein's theory, experiments. Now, the theory came before the confirming experiments, but you have, is a Michelson-Morley experiment with light, and there's all these different things they use, and you figured out, oh, well, you know, there's a space-time continuum, and we had these really good measurements that finally showed that Newton's laws didn't work with precision, that there were these sort of, you had to make allowances for relativity. So now, typically for your everyday use, it's not going to matter. But if you're trying to like put a man on the moon, you got to be really careful when you make those calculations, and you have to use Einstein's equations. Like if you want to say force equals mass times acceleration, right? If you're a physics major, this is like, oh yeah, you know that, right? So the force is equal to the mass multiplied by the acceleration. So you want to know like how much thrust do I need to get beyond Earth's atmosphere, so I don't like go back down into, you know, I want escape velocity. I'll need that to overcome gravity, and so I'll have to use this equation. But Einstein says that's not actually going to work, but it's going to be F equals ma. You know, one of my professors, but plus junk was basically plus the relativity adjustments. And if you don't put in those relativity adjustments, if you're dealing with huge amounts of force and really large amounts of acceleration and huge masses like the mass of the Earth, those little errors add up to a big amount, and then pretty soon your capsule's like going out past the moon and off to deep space, where the astronauts are going to die of asphyxiation instead of landing on the moon like you want them to. So, but this change from Newton to Einstein was a huge paradigm shift. Or you get like the geocentric to the heliocentric worldview, which is a fancy way of saying, this is always terrible. Maybe I'll fix this after class. Geocentric versus heliocentric. So people thought the Earth was the center of the universe, and they thought that until they saw some changes. So they saw like, you had this phenomenon called retrograde motion of planets like Venus and Mars. So they'd like go, I think Mercury too. So you'd like track it in the sky. We have pretty good telescopes, right? So the old crappy telescopes, and you just naked eye would say, and maybe some like, you know, little graph or something that'd be positioned a certain way. You just like draw little points and look like this. You know, okay, so that looks like a regular orbit. But then we got better telescopes, and actually it would be like, it would look like this. And you're like, what the heck? Why is it doing that? That's really weird. And how does that fit in with our theory that the Earth's in the middle of the universe, and all the planets and the sun revolve around it? So they said, okay, well maybe here's like, here's the planet, say I think it's Mars, big example. So, and then you have so here's the Earth, and here's Mars. And they thought, maybe it's doing this. And they call this like an epicycle. And so the idea is that you have like this sort of, Mars is going in a little circle as that little circle goes around in a regular orbit. And then things looked even more chaotic, and they added some more cycles, so the orbit ended up going like this, right? And at a certain point, you think, okay, something's wrong with our theory. We get all this new data, and you get these weird irregular orbits instead of something simpler. And so, you know, why is Mars like doing these weird squiggly patterns?
Because something to do with its orbital speed and how it kind of goes ahead of Earth, but then Earth starts coming around.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, that's basically it. So you look at the case is that the Earth is here, and Mars is here, and the Earth is spinning like a top on its axis, and you know, Mars catches up, Mars slows down, and so we're seeing Mars, you know, move and we're spinning our axis, but we see Mars move and pass us up. Actually the Earth is going faster, right? So the Earth is going to pass it up, and then Mars is going to be over here, and so like we're looking at sometimes across the solar orbit, and so depending on when the Earth is, maybe the Earth passes up and the Earth is here, and Mars is here, so it's going to like move. So anyway, eventually we moved to the idea that, oh no, the Earth is spinning like a top on its axis and revolving around the sun with the other planets. Now, and it only happened when you have this mountain of data finally caused a paradigm shift. And so that's what you should do with your theories. Now the thing is, like, when do you switch, right? You don't switch when you see one little difference. You switch when there's like a bunch of evidence that says, oh, that theory's not working anymore. So anyway, you have some reason to privilege your own beliefs, particularly if they're like put together with care and based on a lot of objective evidence. And so that's if you so now you don't want to dismiss other evidence out of hand, but you have some reason, at least if you have a really good belief system, you have some reason to privilege it. And the second thing is just like practical reasons. And here, W.K. Clifford has this thing where he says, look, if you say I don't have any time to check things out, you don't have any time to believe. And so you should like withhold judgment. So here you should withhold judgment on things you haven't had a chance to check out. But also, you have to live and you have to act. And you have to do so on the basis of beliefs. So you got to pick something, right? You got to eat, right? What are you going to eat? Right? You got to pick something, right? Oh, is this, this peach mango drink, are these dyes going to give me cancer? I don't know. I haven't had a chance to check it out. Actually, I have, and I don't think so, right? Now, did I spend like, a year researching like yellow number 5 and see whether it was carcinogenic or not? No, but I've done some reading about it. But there are other things where you just, you got to make a judgment because you got to make a choice. And you think, oh, what should I eat? Should I be exercising? What kind of job should I get? What has a good employment market? And you're never going to have perfect evidence. So you just rely on the beliefs you already have. And the idea is, as you go along in life, you try to find evidence try to pick your beliefs based on the evidence rather than looking at evidence that supports your beliefs that you already have. Why? Because you had them for a long time. That's a bad way of doing things. Okay, let's talk about, we talked about argument by analogy. So we talked about like the abortion thing. We talked about like, okay, well, is abortion analogous to genocide? And you take a fetus, is a fetus analogous to a human being or not? And so a fetus is similar to a grown human being. Actually, a fetus is similar to a grown human being in some ways, but not in other ways. So we had fetus, grown human. The question is, are they enough alike? So we say grown human has the right to life. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it's wrong to murder innocent people, for example, right? So human beings have a right to life. But then the question is, does the fetus share enough features with a grown human so we could also say that they have a right to life? And I noticed last time we were talking about this, people always want to jump to some other topic. Oh, well, what kind of life will the fetus have, right? Well, you can't kill homeless people because you think that they're better off dead, right? So it's not when you're talking about, is a fetus like a human being? Does it have a right to life? Does it share enough of these things with a grown human that we would say it has a right to life. The idea of the social consequences of abortion are irrelevant. So you want to focus on the analogy. People will also say, I mean, I don't want to get in red herring yet. I'll get in that in a minute. But can you see, like, you want to look at, and then you want to say, like, what about like a fetus and an infant, right? Well, most people think that you can't commit infanticide. Like they used to do this in China, where they take girl babies because people wanted to have boys, and so they like drowned them. Like people used to drown kittens, I guess. They just say, "Oh, more a girl." We're only allowed to have one child under this communist regime, and we want to have a boy because our culture says, carry on the family line, and it's boys are better than girls. So it's like kill it, right? So they would do that, and people would look at it and say that's abominable. And most people think killing baby is like, I don't know, killing babies is a quintessentially wrong act, right? So then the question is, if it's wrong to kill an infant, how is a fetus like an infant? If a fetus is close enough to an infant, if it shares enough qualities for the infant, it seems that this quality of having a right to life would go over here. Wrong to kill is just another way of saying has a right to life. And then we talked about some other things like the genocide and lynching and so on. Another more arguments by analogy. And then we talked about this violinist analogy. Just to refresh your memory, you're kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers. You're hooked up by some machine to the violinist. There's some substance in your body that the violinist needs to live, and you have an opportunity to escape. If you unhook yourself from the machine, the violinist will die. If you stay hooked up to the machine in 9 months, you will be the worse for wear, and the violinist will live. So the question is it permissible to escape?
Are you there against your will?
Yeah, you've been kidnapped, and and they're keeping you prisoner. But you see, like, there's a way they leave the door unlocked or something, or they for whatever there's an opportunity for you to escape. But as soon as you unhook yourself, the violinist is going to die.
Maybe you should have asked me first.
Yeah.
Someone might have been willing, and
Well-
or B, it's like, it goes back again to like, is it wrong to not act
Yeah,
to
well,
save life? Because it's like, I mean, I really have, what reasons do I have to keep this violinist alive? Especially if he's going out of his way to be.
right. Well, they didn't though, right? So he's like a virtuoso violinist.
What is
So
the right to kill? Or the right, or what's wrong about killing?
I think it's horrible.
Yeah.
When
let's
everybody dies.
let's assume. So we always have to start out with like widely shared premises. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, it's like wrong to kill innocent people, and that death is bad, despite what Socrates might say about it. But those seem to be widely shared assumptions. And so if you assume that it's wrong to kill innocent people, and that death is a bad thing, and that if you inadvertently, like if you cause the death of the person, that it's a bad thing, then it seems like you'd have reasons not to kill the violinist, because you'll kill him by unhooking yourself. But also, what's going on with you though? You're kept out there. You're like strapped to a bed, and you're in the cell, and you have limited.
Job,
Yeah.
health, my finances are gone.
Yeah.
My life could lead me to death, leaving due to the lack of.
Yeah.
I love the violinist analogy, but I can't help but because you were kidnapped, right?
Yeah.
If using that analogy for abortion, then wouldn't you say that that's a rape situation, that
Yeah.
you were raped and that happened? Because you also have the same analogy of, say, you lost a bet and you had to do the 9 months to help the violinist. And then even then, could you also say, for almost 2 decades after the violinist is cured, he needs a caretaker, and you need to be that caretaker?
Kidnapped again.
I don't know, it kind of seems like it's
Yeah, I
almost
mean-
too broad.
sacrificing my blood for the violinist. What is the violinist gonna do that can't be replicated in the advance upon?
It's like whose rights in this situation are more important?
Yeah.
It's like, does the right to live on his part over what would
I
be
guess the whole argument is what gives value.
Override
exactly,
his
yeah,
right.
does it override my right to live my life the way that I choose, you know?
Well, he was like a master violinist, so, like,
'Cause that's
And I'm
where
a
I come to
homeless
that.
man, but I still have the right to live my own life.
you do. but-
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
So
It's just-
Thompson wants to say it's
So
all
is it-
about autonomy, right? It's like the woman's right over her own body. And the idea is that you might feel bad about it. You might feel like you're doing something that's bad. You might be sorry that you have to do it, but also you say, well, I have myself to think about, I have my life to think about. So it's like, that's,
Or you could base it off value from others. So let's say you were robbed and no one liked you. Or like you got kidnapped by the violinist and no one liked you. But a lot of people like the violinist and his work. So technically he would have more societal value.
It does seem to be culturally relativistic, so with
Yeah.
let's leave cultural relativism back in week one where it belongs. It's bunk. So the violinist, so the argument this person makes is a feminist philosopher, and she wants to argue in favor of abortion, and she agrees abortion is a sad thing, that it's bad, nobody likes abortion, but also it's like a woman doesn't have to give up her autonomy, her freedom of movement, her, to take on this burden is not a responsibility that she has. But the question you might ask though is you bring up there's the idea that you're kidnapped. So then you look at this analogy, it seems like one of the problems is it's not, it would only be analogous to rape, because so there's a question of responsibility.
I don't know, you could even say just having a child would kidnap your life.
But then how did you get pregnant?
Yeah, you kind of made the decision when you moved down
I
there.
mean, accidents happen or just,
You take a risk. I mean, when you
Yeah.
have sex that there's a chance of getting, but there's a chance of contraceptive failure. You know there's a chance, if you have unprotected sex, the risk is actually pretty big. And most cases of abortion are after the fact contraception. People that have a risk, maybe they're drinking and they have sex and their inhibitions are down, but you start drinking with someone and getting frisky, you might end up having sex, right? So this is this question you either knew or should have known that you could get pregnant by having unprotected sex. So then it comes down to this question, you're not really, it seems like the disanalogy has to do with the responsibility. It seems disanalogous in that people that unwanted pregnancy weren't given that pregnancy against their will, except for cases of rape, which are like 1% of the total number of abortions.
I feel like there's no
Very
blind
small
question.
number. What's that?
It says that we have a responsibility to keeping people alive when we have the opportunity to.
Are you saying that's an assumption here?
Yeah, it seems implied that if I am supposed to keep this violinist alive, it's because he was gonna die, and I can save him. Therefore, I have to save him. Any other answer would not seem to work there. So it seems like even outside of that case, anytime anybody is in danger, I have to help them if I can help them.
Here's a question about are you killing them or are you just withdrawing life support? And does that mean if you're
saying that you put value in human life.
But it's a question about This is a problem. I'll say sort of the question about the active passive problem, and that might be a problem with this analogy too. Is are you really killing, or are you letting die? And it seems like here with abortion, you're not letting die. You're actually killing. Right, so you're doing or you're doing it by proxy, right? The doctor is killing the fetus, by cutting into little pieces and vacuuming it out, or burning it with saline solution, or whatever they do, right? So there's you're actively killing the fetus. So that's in the violinist example, you're unhooking yourself from the machine, and then he's losing that life support that he needs from you to live. So it seems like it's a different case. It's killing in one case and it's letting die in the other case. And you might say, well, it's magnanimous for you to stay, but you're not obligated to do so. Yeah.
I would say, like, the kidnapping example, in real life, like, gosh, okay, so I have an argument for this. When someone dies, if they are not an organ donor, even if it would save a small child's life, we are not allowed to remove their organs and give them
Right.
to someone else if they
Yeah.
did not give us their consent
Right.
before they passed away. This is a dead body. There's
Yeah.
nothing more that it's going to get out of. It's
Yeah.
basically just going to rot in the ground, when really there are all of these life-saving organs that we could be harvesting, but we don't, because they did not give their consent.
Mhm.
What I kind of like would compare this like kidnapper situation is that same idea, but for pregnant women. It's like we're taking away, and like, you know, I personally wouldn't get an abortion. I do believe that it is killing, but like, we're taking away a woman's rights, something that we wouldn't even do for a dead body to save someone else's life, a human with a consciousness, a sentient being. We're taking away her rights to save something that isn't sentient and that is completely dependent on her for survival. So I don't really see how it carries over, like, in terms of the way that we view other medical causes. It's like we give that personal altruism to a corpse, but we don't give it to a living sentient being.
So this is so I'd say like I would say like self-conscious or rational being, because fetuses are definitely sentient. They have feelings and sensations.
Sorry about
But
that. You're
but
right.
but I mean, but you make so this is, and often you'll hear like analogy, counter analogy, and this is a good technique, and you make a really good case for the organ donor. It seems like that your body is your property, and even if it means somebody else is going to die as a result of your choice, you're not obligated. Like you're not obligated to give them your organs after you're dead. Yeah, so here that's like another analogy about bodily autonomy. Although it's interesting that so here this seems to support like the case of abortion rights. Can you think of another? Can you think of another disanalogy? Can you think of an analogy that would like argue against bodily autonomy, abortion rights? So you're saying that you can't deprive a dying person of your organs even if you're after you're dead. Yeah.
My second analogy would be like, if you spoke to like a kid in foster care, say, you know, kind of on the wrong side of the tracks, who was lost in the system, the idea, like the analogy that everyone turns to when they say abortion is good because look at the life that this child will live. I can almost guarantee you that child will not say, yes, I wish I was aborted, instead of living this life.
Yeah.
So if that fetus probably would not choose it for themselves, and that pretty much is proven across the board,
Yeah.
then why do we have the right to make that decision for the fetus?
Yeah. And that's not necessarily an argument by analogy. It's that's actually a perspective thing. Maybe it fits in with your empathy thing. You're putting yourself in the other person's shoes.
Well, my analogy would be like the fetus in this situation is the grown child. I guess you're right. It's not. It's kind of.
It's like a thought.
I
So
can probably make it.
argument by analogy is like all thought experiments. I think all thought experiments are arguments by analogy, but not all arguments for analogy are thought experiments or something. That doesn't sound like exactly an argument by analogy. But you think of some other cases where you don't have control over your own body, and people accept that there are limits for what you can do with your body. Yeah.
When you're underage, when you're a minor, you don't have control.
Yeah.
If you need a medical procedure and you don't want it,
Right.
then it's your parent's option.
So and that might be a special case. How about like, we're thinking about like a woman making a choice that's controversial. Like, let's leave like, you know, a underage girl who's pregnant. That's a really thorny issue. But let's just pick, let's say the adults. Do adults have rights of body? So your organs can't be taken against your will. Are there other things that have to do with your body that can be done against your will? Or things you can't do with your own body, according to laws that the majority of people accept in the United States?
Can do.
Can do. Yeah, so you need like, so there's like counter analogies. Now, analogies.
Can you do drugs?
No, I was gonna say
Drugs. How about prostitution?
illegal.
That's so
There you go.
dumb.
If you, if
There you
there's
go.
like an idea.
Not just drugs, like legal or illegal, right? Like I can't get, I occasionally have asthma and I use an inhaler, right, for it. And, in order to get, I get refills with it, but after my refills run out, I gotta go to a doctor, pay him some money, and he writes me a little permission slip like I'm a little kid to go to the doctor and say, yes, can I please have another inhaler because I'm having a hard time breathing, right? So and everybody accepts that that's normal, that's how things should be. So if you agree with prescriptions, then it seems like you agree there's some limits to what you can do with your own body, what you can put into it. And if you think you can't take heroin or, snort cocaine or whatever, that you shouldn't be able to do that, and the law, with the society or the law has a right to tell you can't, then it seems like that you might say there might be some limits to your bodily autonomy when it comes to abortion. So you can see how this sort of, you can go back and forth and see, well, what's analogous, and you always want to appeal to widely accepted premises. And sometimes it's strategic, I suppose, but I'd say these two things. Now, one of the things that can happen is a person can start thinking about it and say, well, I really think abortion rights are really important, and I have this strong intuition of the bodily autonomy, and I have these other beliefs about the war on drugs is okay and the prostitution laws are okay. Sometimes what happens is these go away and they become a pro-choice libertarian, right? They'll say, okay, yeah, I guess you're right. I never thought about it before. I think prescriptions are kind of insulting for an adult, and people should be able to take whatever they want. And the same thing with drugs and prostitution.
I do think that.
So you never know. Okay.
Yeah, but then I feel like you need segregation to keep people out of other people's
I think funding,
bubbles.
instead of funding into
What do you mean by
war
that?
on drugs, it should be funding into helping addiction.
Let's say that some people want to eat a bunch of acid, but they become a little more loose, a little bit more friendly. They like communicating and reaching across to some other people who are more reserved in their nation. They don't want all these people constantly invading their sphere, which could cause a lot of tension, which could, lead to all kinds of things. So you would want to
She's being nice to me.
say,
All right, let's move on. We're on drugs. We'll get that later on, maybe. Ad hominem argument. What is an ad hominem argument? Anybody heard of this before?
What?
Ad hominem. It's kind of an argument. It's a fallacy. The ad hominem
Bringing
fallacy.
up something that doesn't relate to the subject to prove your argument.
Yeah, so the idea is that it literally means against the man, or you could say against the person, if you like. You're making an argument against the person instead of focusing on what they said. So sometimes it's just like an insult, like you could say, you suck, or something like that. Somebody gives you an argument and you say, you suck, or you call somebody a name. So, but often it's more, you get the ad hominem circumstantial. So you'd say, I heard Borrowdale is a libertarian. Yeah, I know why he likes libertarianism. I think he likes to smoke dope, and libertarianism gives an excuse to indulge his vices, right? Something like that. Or, I know what Borrowdale supports prostitution. That's just because he can't get a date. Or whatever, right? So you have you make argument against a person, and you try to explain why they have the views they do based on some supposed hidden motivation or preference they have, rather than addressing the argument. If I say, for example, well, in Nevada where they made prostitution legal, you get fewer incidences of STDs, less prostitution-related crime, and let's just say those two things, right? And sex workers actually paid decently, or something like that. So you get I'll say there's less spread of STDs, less prostitution-related violence and coercive prostitution, pimps and so on, and so those less less women on the streets, less streetwalkers, right? So those are three benefits, and you say, oh yeah, well, Yeah, you would say that, Borrowdale. I know. I bet you can't even get a date. You know, it's, who would want to sleep with you? They'd have to pay, obviously. So that's why you're in favor of prostitution. That's why you want it legal in Eugene. That wouldn't be an argument, right? That's just like an insult or something. And if I give you 3 reasons why, like objective reasons based on empirical evidence, if you're bringing up like whether I can get a date or not, or whether, you know, a woman would have to pay me to have sex with me, then that's obviously not, like, that's not an argument. That's just an insult. And it's a distraction. Yeah.
So would it count as an ad hominem if, let's say, two people are drinking and someone's giving an argument, they're giving all these points and evidence, and it's like, oh, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about, you're just drunk. Does that count as ad hominem, or does that have to be less circumstantial?
It depends on, you know, are you trying to like, are they making an argument, or are they just like, you know, slurring together incoherent sentences?
Let's assume that they're actually, what they're saying actually makes sense.
That's actually, I think that would be an ad hominem argument. It's kind of like a distraction technique. It's and sometimes there's a couple of movies I remember where you have like a comment where the person really is drunk, and because they're drunk, they say something that they wouldn't ordinarily say, and it's like really prescient. They say, the problem with you, you know, is, you know, whatever it is, fill in the blank. It mentioned main character's flaws, and the other person says you're drunk, right, and just totally sidesteps it. Yeah, so that might be a good example of the ad hominem. How about this? You don't have a right to say anything about abortion. You're a man. You can't get pregnant. Not yet, anyway. So listen, it's a good example of the ad hominem, right? And then what would follow, like argument by analogy, like, does that mean if you're not in the military, you can't have a view on military policy in the U.S.? Does that mean if you're not a man, you can't have a view on the draft because you can't be drafted?